Good to see everybody tonight. Thanks. It's good to see you too, Mark. I appreciate that. Thank you. We got a dead crowd tonight. Come on, let's go. Tired, I know. All right. So we're going to do this a little bit differently. Not this is good news for y'all, because we do. The bad news is, for those of y'all taking class for credit, you got your midterm tonight. I'm going to give you that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the study questions, chapters 20 through 24, you need that for your midterm, because the midterm cuts off at chapter 24. So what we're going to do, and we're ready to start chapter 23. So we'll do 23 and 24 tonight. Hopefully we get further than that, but that'll get you to where the test is. So get your study questions out. Here's what we're going to do. So instead of you turning them in like normal and me grading them and then I give them back to you, you'll need them this week. So if I counted right, there's 108 points on this one. And so all of y'all are going to get 108 out of 108. Thank you. I'm glad somebody's happy about that. All right.
That's the news all day.
Yeah. So, because what we're going to do is we're going to go over them now. And if you're missing something, we'll just write it in there. I'm just going to give everybody all the points, but I want to make sure you've got what you need to help you on the test. Okay. So let's do 20, 21, 22, because we've already done those chapters. Then as we go through 23 and 24, we'll do them. That way you don't have to turn them in tonight. You can keep them, and I'll just record that everybody got full points. Okay, so chapter 20, number 1, what's the Decalogue? Yeah, so that's really all you had to put there. It's the 10 Commandments. It's just the official name for the 10 Commandments. What's the focus of the first 4 commandments?
Man's obligation to God.
That is correct. What's the focus of the last 6?
Man's obligation to fellow man.
That's correct. All right, number 4, what did Christ do concerning the old law? Yeah, he fulfilled it. Scriptural support? Matthew 5:17, right? You could also put Colossians 2:14. Okay, yeah, so he fulfilled it. He didn't destroy the law, but he fulfilled the law. All right, which commandment's missing? Yeah, the Sabbath. Which one is that?
6.
Fourth. Yeah, so but the 4th commandment, which is keep the Sabbath holy, that is the one that's missing. Okay, and then all these others explain. We're not going to. You can go through those. Basically, you're just telling me what does each commandment say, so we don't have to go through all that. Unless anybody has any questions about that part. Okay. So then we talked about there are 4 types of worship. What are they?
True worship.
Mm-hmm.
Vain worship.
Yep.
Ignorant worship.
Yep.
And spiritual and will worship.
Will worship. Right. So you got true. The true is John 4:23, 24.
Vain worship is Matthew 15:7 through 9.
Uh-huh.
Ignorant worship is Acts 7:23.
17:23.
17:23.
Yeah, 17:23.
And will worship is Colossians 2:23.
Correct. Right. So that's what you should have for that. Okay. In chapter 21, so God declared murderers are to be killed. Why is this not a contradiction? Commandment number 6 said, "Thou shalt not kill." Why is it okay then to have murderers executed? Isn't that killing them? Okay. So, and we talked about the way Jesus phrased it, right? So it says, "Thou shalt not kill." How did Jesus say it? Yeah, "Thou shalt not murder," right? So we mentioned what this is. The reason it's not a violation, the commandment is against murder. You cannot kill an innocent person. But we talked about self-defense is allowed, soldiers in war is allowed, things like that. The government, Romans 13, the government is allowed to execute criminals who have violated a law that requires a death penalty offense. So that's why that would not be a violation of the 6th commandment. The 6th commandment is talking about murdering an innocent person. Do what? Well, it could be premeditated, or it may not even be premeditated. It may be you just get in an argument with somebody and then you kill them, but that's murder, right? So that's what the commandment forbids. It doesn't forbid killing under all circumstances. but murder is specifically what's forbidden. Okay, now what's the general rule for cases involving injuries? Just, restitution, right? So God gave very specific commandments about different, well, if this happens, then you do this. And if this happens, you do this. So God was very specific about it. But the general overall idea was you got to make restitution. If you do something to hurt somebody else, you got to make it right. You got to restore that thing or pay a fine or what. There's some kind of restitution that you've got to make. Okay? All right, chapter 22. So what was required if a man seduced a woman? What do you have to do? Had to marry her.
Pay a dowry.
Had to pay a dowry. How much? 50 shekels, right? What else? What? He cannot ever divorce her. And then there's one more thing. Yeah, so if the father refuses the marriage, then he doesn't have to marry her, but what'd you say? Still has to pay the dowry, right? So that's all that's required if a man seduced a woman. Okay, so everybody got all those? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. So what were the rules concerning loans?
You can loan the money, but you can't charge a usury, which is interest.
Exactly. Usury is interest. They were not allowed to charge that. Could you take something as collateral? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Especially if it was their cloak, you had to return it by sundown because why? They needed it to sleep, right? Yeah. So you would have to give that back. But you could take collateral. You could take something as security on it, but you could not charge interest. Okay. So that brings us to chapter 23. So then as we go through this, you'll keep those questions kind of in front of you right there. We'll go through them as we're looking at this. And I'll make sure that everybody's got the right answers and got what you need. All right, so chapter 23. Get it to work here. Here we go. Verses 1 through 9. So what we see in these first 9 verses, chapter 23, are just some miscellaneous laws. And so just to give you a couple of them, there's several of them in here, but talks about, again, not bearing false witness. Don't lie about people. A new one, it talks about, like, don't join a mob in doing something evil. It's not okay just because everybody else is doing it. Basically, it's a lot of things about being kind to your neighbors, treating people right. Don't take bribes. Don't kill an innocent person. Those kind of things. Okay, but again, it's mostly about how to treat each other. All right, and then in verses 10 through 13, I thought I had that up there, but I don't. So if you need me to spell this for you, this is where it talks about something called the sabbatical year. Sabbaatical, sabbatical. The sabbatical year. So that sounds like it might be related to what?
Sabbatical.
Yeah, Sabbath, right? Or, yeah, off work. Right, so this dealt with farming. Okay, and this is really going to take effect when they get to Canaan, because obviously out in the wilderness, they're not doing any farming. But God said, when you get to the promised land and you've got your permanent dwellings, this is what you're going to do. So God tells them they are to work the fields for 6 years, and then the 7th year, they are to leave it alone. Do not farm it, do not harvest it, don't do anything. If something grows on its own, that's fine, but you're not to work the field, okay, for that 7th year. And so this is, again, the idea of the 7th day, the 7th year, it's a rest. And so God promised them, so you go, well, we're going to go a whole year without farming, what are we going to eat? Yeah, so kind of like the manna from heaven, right? On day 6, you're going to get enough manna for day 7, so don't worry about it. Same thing here. You're going to get an abundant harvest in year 6 that will really kind of covers 3 years. Because it'll be enough for year 6, it'll be enough for year 7, and it'll also be enough for year 8, because year 8 you've got to start planting again. It takes a while for that. So really God is saying, I'm going to provide you until the new crop comes in later on in year 8. I'll provide for you. You don't have to worry about it. Okay? Now, if you continue on reading in the Bible, of course, you see that the Israelites mostly ignored this. And so, as you can imagine, God wasn't real pleased about that. And so this is one of those reasons why they were taken into the Babylonian captivity, which lasted, does anybody know how long that was? 70 years. Yeah. And that was punishment for all the sabbatical years that the Jews ignored, and they just kept farming. And so again, that's not in this book, but you see that later on. But that punishment had to do with them ignoring the sabbatical year that was set up here in the book of Exodus. Okay, I think that's in 2 Chronicles, chapter 36. I think it talks about that. So they have the sabbatical year. Again, God tells them to rest on the Sabbath day. They're supposed to keep that. And then also in here, he talks about they are not even to mention the names of false gods. They're not even to speak their names. All right, verses 14 through 19. I think that's in 24, yeah. You have in verses 14 through 19 the establishment of 3 annual feasts. Okay, so we'll put these up here. So these 3 annual feasts are appointed. Now, we've already talked about this one, the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. And so you might want to put in parentheses by that, this is the Passover. Okay. So you'll notice in chapter 23, question number 1, what are the 3 feasts and what did each commemorate? Okay, so the unleavened bread, the Passover, what did that commemorate? Yeah, the Passover, right? God passing over. This was the death of the firstborn. He's going to do that to the Egyptians, but not to the Israelites because they had put the blood on the door, right? So the Feast of Unleavened Bread or Passover, it commemorates the death of the firstborn, God passing them over, not killing their firstborn. So we already talked about that, but that's reiterated here. And then the second one is the Feast of the Harvest, which, as you can see, this is also known as Pentecost. And this was to be celebrated 50 days after unleavened bread, and it was always on a Sunday. Okay, but it'd be that 50th day. So you have 7 weeks, 7 and 7 is 49 days. And then the first day of that 8th week, always on a Sunday, you would have the Feast of the Harvest, Pentecost. And so what did this commemorate? Well, this commemorates what we're studying right at this moment in these chapters, the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. So this was for them to remember God gave the law to Moses at Mount Sinai. Okay, because when this was originally done, that was 50 days after the Passover. Okay, so this feast would be to commemorate that. And then the last one, the Feast of Ingathering. This is also known as, and you might recognize it more commonly referred to by us as the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, but it was also, God also called it the Feast of Ingathering. And it will commemorate the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, so that everybody remembers that. Okay, so it will commemorate the wandering for 40 years in the wilderness. So the men, they were required to be present, of course, at these on these feast days, and they were required to make offerings. What kind of offerings? I don't mean like what kind of animal, but what? Yeah, the first fruits. In other words, your best. You are to give your best to God. A lesson there for us? Yes, no, maybe. We are to give our best. Not God doesn't want our leftovers. We need to give God our best. Oh, I had tabernacles up there. All right, and then in verses 20 through 33, we learn that Moses is told that an angel is going to lead them. An angel of God is going to lead them to Canaan, to the promised land, as they go through the wilderness. But this is no ordinary angel. Not that there is an ordinary angel, but there's something different about this one. Okay, which gives us the clues to who at least two scholars think he is. And we'll look at a scriptural reference here in a second. But what was your question? Yeah, but God is telling Moses, this angel is going to lead you. You're going to follow him. Okay. But what we see about this angel is this angel had the power to forgive sins and had the power to punish the wicked. And God tells Moses that this angel is to be obeyed explicitly, completely, absolutely. You get the point. And punish the wicked. And this angel is to be obeyed without question. So a lot of scholars think this angel would be who? Christ, right? Because a regular angel can't forgive sins or punish the wicked, but Christ can. Right? So 1 Corinthians 10, 1 and 4, we get a clue here. It says, moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Okay. So good indication that that's who we're dealing with here. Do what? Yeah. And so this is another thing that you can mention to people, because there are some people out there who they will claim that Christ, when he was born to Mary, that's when he started. Like Christ is not eternal. He was created right there. Here's one of those like, no. And there's other references too where Christ was with them in the wilderness. Jesus has always been, because Jesus is God. So Jesus is eternal. He is not a created being. Well, an angel, again, we have a certain concept of what angels are. What does the word actually mean? Does anybody know? It's a messenger, right? Was Jesus also a messenger of God? Yeah, he was, right? So there are angels like Michael and Gabriel, who those are created beings. But again, it always depends on the context. And so in this case, this is the messenger. This is the one who's going to lead you. and who's going to command you and tell you what you're supposed to do. So it's like delivering God's message. Okay, so in that sense, he's an angel. He's not Jesus, obviously, he's not an angel like Gabriel or the other angels that are mentioned. But in that sense, he is God's messenger. Okay? Now, God tells them that if you will obey, if you will do what you're told, God said that he would be an enemy of Israel's enemies if they obey him. What enemies are we talking about? Yeah, but like where? Yeah, the Canaanites, right? So when you get to Canaan, yeah, all the people are already living there. They're not going to be too excited about you taking what they think is their land, right? So they're not going to be real friendly, but God is saying, I will be an enemy to your enemies. So he said, the angel will go into Canaan before you, ensuring that you will be able to subdue the Canaanites. If you do what? If you obey me, if you do what you're told, you can't lose. Now, here they're also told, you see question number 2 on your homework there. How are they supposed to deal with the Canaanite religion? Well, this is where we see this. God told them they are to completely reject all the Canaanite false gods, but don't stop there. It's not enough just to reject it and say, I'm not going to worship those gods. God also tells them, I want you, when you go into the land and you take it, you're going to see they're going to have statues and idols. And God said, I want you to destroy all of their idols. So it's not enough just to not worship them. He said, I want you to obliterate all the vestiges of their false religions when you get there. Okay. And then something else interesting, which we see play out when they get to Canaan, is God promised them the land. So you're going to get the land of Canaan. Are they going to get it all at once? No, they will not. This is going to be a gradual process. And here's where God tells them that, right? Because basically the idea is, I'm going to let you conquer the Canaanites gradually so that you don't utterly destroy the land. You don't need total war here. So it's kind of a piece at a time. And then on question number 3 there, why were they not to live with the Canaanites, right? Because God tells them, I want you to push them out. So he said, don't make a covenant with them. Don't make any agreements with them. You need to push them out, drive them out of the land. And you can probably figure out the answer to that question without me even telling you. Why would God not want the Israelites to live with them and befriend them? Yeah, the people you hang out with influence you. Whether you want them to or not, they do. And so God knew the Israelites would be influenced to do what? Yeah, follow their false gods, to go along, to get along, those kind of things. And God is telling them there will be no compromise. Okay, so you do not need to live among these people. Now, are the Israelites going to honor that command? No. They're going to marry them and do everything that God told them not to do. Okay? And when they did intermarry and intermingled, what happened? Yeah, were they pulled away from God? Yeah, they were. Just like God said they would be, right? So again, this idea when God, I can't believe, God's got all these rules and God's trying to protect me from me. Right? He's telling me, Mark, these things will be bad for you. That's why I'm telling you not to do this. It will hurt you. Right? And so he knew this is going to be bad for you Israelites if you mingle with them, so don't do that. But they're going to do it eventually. So he knew they would be tempted to serve those gods, and they will. All right, chapter 24. So here in the first 11 verses, we have the establishment of God's covenant with Israel. Now, what's a covenant? An agreement, a contract. And so God calls Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, 70 of the elders, and he calls them out separately to come worship God. Not all of them, but he just calls them. I mean, of course, Moses is the only one that really gets close to God. And so then after this, Moses goes and he tells all the people everything that God has told him, everything we've been reading about in these last few chapters. Okay, here's the law of God. Here are the commandments. Here's all these other laws that we've been given. So Moses shares that with everybody. And the people agreed to obey God. So we're off to a good start. And then it also says that's when Moses is writing these things down. Okay, so then Moses sends some young men to make sacrifices to God, to make some offerings, to seal this covenant. And so Moses takes that blood, and so you see here your first question, sacrificial blood was sprinkled on the altar and the people. What did that symbolize? So Moses takes the blood and he sprinkles some of it on the altar. Then he reads the stuff that he'd written down after he sprinkles the blood on the altar, and then he sprinkles the rest of the blood on the people. Okay, and so this seals the covenant. And to answer the question you've got there, it symbolizes a couple of things. Okay, but you do want to know this sealed the covenant. And so a couple of things are symbolic here. So it symbolizes, for one thing, the unity between God and the Israelites. Some of the blood went to God's altar, some of it went on the people. So there's a unity between God and the Israelites. And then secondly, it symbolized that sin was fatal, certainly spiritually speaking. It can be physically too. Sin was fatal, and the only thing that would cleanse it is what? Is blood. It's the only thing that will cleanse sin. Okay? So sin is fatal, certainly spiritually, might be physically as well, but blood will be the only thing that will cleanse that. Okay, so then number two, the next question, that one should be real easy. What blood's necessary for the new covenant? Lambs and goats? Christ, right. Yeah, the blood of Christ. The blood of Christ is the only thing that will cleanse us from our sins. Okay? And Christ did it once for all, whereas they had to keep sacrificing. They had to continually keep sacrificing for the blood to cleanse them. But Jesus did it once for all. Okay? So the blood of the sacrificed animal is with the old covenant. The blood of Christ is with the new covenant. And then it talks about how they saw the glory of God. Now, does that mean they saw God's face? No. How do we know that? Yeah, 1 Timothy 6 and verse 16 tells us no man has seen God's face. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 16. No man has seen the face of God. So they saw some kind of manifestation of God. We don't know what that looked like exactly, but we do know that whatever it was, it convinced the Israelites that the one true God had made this covenant with them. So it was impressive enough to do that. But, it's hard to say. What did they see exactly? Well, we don't know, but some kind of manifestation of God. Okay, then verses 12 through 18. So this is where God calls Moses to come onto the mountain, Mount Sinai. And we read that Moses took Joshua with him, but only part of the way. We don't know how far, but Joshua went part of the way up the mountain to some point, and then Moses went on the rest of the way without him. And it says that when Moses goes up to the mountain, he left basically two guys in charge of the camp. Do what? It wasn't Nadab and Abihu, but you're in the right family, for one of them anyway. Who was their dad? Aaron. So he leaves Aaron, and also another man that we've seen once before that we don't have a lot of details about him, but he was one of him and Aaron held up Moses' arms with the battle of the Amalekites. So Hur, H-U-R, Hur. So Aaron and Hur were basically left in charge of the camp when Moses goes up to see God. So that's going to work out real well. So this, of course, is where God announces to Moses he's going to give Moses the 10 Commandments on stone tablets. Who's going to write them? God will write. So the finger of God will write it. So Moses doesn't have to chisel it in. God's going to put them in there. But he tells Moses, I'm going to give you these stone tablets. Again, they're writing on front and back that's got the commandments on it. And so the Israelites, they can see on the mountain the fire and everything that's going on up there. And so we see that Moses, he goes up to the top of the mountain. He waits for 6 days before God calls him. And so we're told overall, Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights before he goes back down to the camp. So he's there 40 days and 40 nights, and we're told in Deuteronomy that Moses fasted while he was there. So number 3, how long was Moses on the mountain? 40 days, 40 nights. And then question number 4, who were the 3 involved in the transfiguration? Yeah, Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. Okay? The thing they all have in common, among other things, all 3 of them fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, so Moses, we see that account right here, and again in Deuteronomy. Elijah, we're told about that in 1 Kings 19, verse 8. We see that he fasted 40 days and 40 nights. And then Christ, of course, Matthew chapter 4, verse 2. Right before he was tempted. Sure, yeah. So Moses, the reference is right here, of course, and then also Deuteronomy. Elijah, the reference is 1 Kings 19 and verse 8. And then Christ is Matthew 4 and verse 2. Of course, right before he's tempted by the devil. Okay, so all 3 of those were involved in the transfiguration. They all 3 fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. We see that number 40 a lot. It has some significance. It appears a lot in the scriptures. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to chapter 25, but everything on your test stops right there at chapter 24. So your other test, which you'll have at the end of the class, begins with chapter 25 and goes through the end of Leviticus. That's what will be on that test. The test I'm going to give you here in a few minutes will everything we've covered up to this point. Okay, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the test when we get to the end of class, but see how far we can get here. All right, chapter 25. And so you'll see why this is a good cutoff point at the end of 24 and 25, kind of a good way to divide the class. So beginning in chapter 25, when you look at the rest of the book of Exodus, chapters 25 through 40, these last 15 chapters, the rest of the book of Exodus deals primarily with a couple of things. It deals with how to worship, instructions concerning public worship. And it deals primarily with this thing here. What is this? Yeah, how to build the tabernacle. So it talks about how to do it and then the actual construction. And so as I said, we can go through a lot of this quicker because we don't need to know all those details, but in general, that's what we're going to be looking at. Okay. So, first of all, we want to know what was the tabernacle. So this is a concept of what it would have looked something like this based on the descriptions that we have in the Bible. What is it? What was it? Yeah. So it was a sanctuary. It was the place where formal worship would take place. That's what the tabernacle was. Okay, a sanctuary where the formal worship to God would take place. And as you can see here, it was a portable tent that they could assemble it, because they're wandering in the wilderness. They're not going to stay in one place. So once they construct it, it's something that they can put up and tear back down and put up and tear back down relatively quickly. So as they move, the tabernacle goes with them. Okay. So one way to look at this is going to be the key place of worshiping God from the time of Moses all the way up until when? What will replace the tabernacle? The temple, yeah. So all the way up until the time of, who built the temple? Solomon, right. Which that would be roughly around 970 BC. Remember, the Exodus was about 1450 BC, so that's kind of the time frame you're looking at. So from the time of Moses up until the time of Solomon building the temple, the tabernacle is where they would worship. Yes. Solomon, about 970 BC. Mm-hmm. And so God will give Moses the detailed instructions about how to do all this, which when you just look at that, it seems fairly simple, but it's a lot more complicated than that. That's the finished product. But God will give Moses the pattern. This is how you do this type of thing. And so we've already mentioned a little bit about types and antitypes. And a type is something, in the Old Testament, a person or an event or an object like this, that it foreshadows a person, an object, or an event in the New Testament. That's the antitype. Okay? So the tabernacle would be the type to what for us today? The church. The church would be the antitype. Okay, so as we go further in the class, we're going to look more at types and antitypes, but it's just something in the old that kind of foreshadows something in the new. Okay, so the tabernacle is the type to the church, it's the antitype. Okay, and so God tells Moses, I want the people to give a free will offering so we can build, so you can construct the tabernacle. And what are they going to give from? Yeah, so they've got a lot of wealth. Okay, and so there are indications that they had some wealth while they were in Egypt. They were allowed to have some personal property. And then, of course, when they left Egypt, the Egyptians, yeah, here, take this stuff, just get out. Right? And so they loaded them down with gold and silver and all kinds of things, which was always God's plan. We're going to use that for this. And then also, something else, you guys heard of Josephus? Jewish historian, right? So it's not in the Bible. But remember when they fought the Amalekites? And Josephus recorded that when they fought and defeated the Amalekites, they kind of sacked their place and they took a lot of their wealth too, at least according to him. But we know for sure they took a lot of wealth out of Egypt, but they might have had wealth of the Amalekites, I never can say that word, from them too. So they had plenty of wealth, and a lot of that will be used for the tabernacle. So something that's really interesting when you look at this, and it's telling us about how the people came and they gave and they gave and they gave. Well, they gave so much that Moses had to tell them to stop. Enough with the gold already. We got plenty. So they gave abundantly, so much that literally Moses told them that we don't need any more. And we'll see that in chapter 36 toward the end of Exodus, but he'll say, I don't need any more. We've got more than enough to give. So again, message there for you and me. Give abundantly, give cheerfully, right? Don't be stingy with God. So they gave so willingly that they had more than they needed. Okay, so 2 Corinthians 9, 6, and 7, of course, tells us about giving. We've got to have the right attitude, the right heart. So again, as I said, God is going to give Moses very detailed instructions about how to do this. And do you think, was Moses allowed to deviate from those instructions? No. Okay. And so we're going to notice, and again, as we go through the last part of Exodus, why we can go through it quicker than what we've been doing so far, is because we don't have to memorize every one of these details. But what I want you to understand, why are the details in there? Yeah, God said it. And what is He telling us about Himself?
The way I want it.
Yeah, I want things exactly the way I want them. And so how do we do it?
Like He said.
Exactly like He said. I'm amazed how many people can't understand that concept. Well, no, you don't have to do it that way. You can do it another way. No. We've got to worship God. We've got to do the things just the way God told us to do it. So you see a lot of details in this that shows me that God is exact. He knows exactly what He wants. And he will tell Moses over and over again, and we will see the Scriptures say over and over again, and Moses did all that God commanded him. Okay, it doesn't say Moses did some of it or Moses ignored some of it. He did all that God commanded him. This was built exactly to God's specifications. He didn't leave it to, well, Moses, just throw something up there. It doesn't matter. It matters. Okay, so yeah, we don't need to memorize all the details, but understand why the details are there. It gives us insight to the character of God and how we're supposed to worship Him. So I'm not allowed to go through the Scriptures and pick and choose or change things. If God said to do something a certain way, why don't we do the Lord's Supper on Wednesday night? Well, yeah, but come on, Bob. I mean, wouldn't it be better to do it Sunday and Wednesday? Because then we're really remembering Jesus, right? We're doing it twice a week. That's what He said, right? If He'd want us to do it on Wednesday night, pretty sure He'd have said that, right? He'd have said, I want you to do it twice a week. I want you to do it 7 days a week. I want you to do it 5 times a day. God could have said it anyway. He said, I want you to do it on the first day of the week. That's why we do it that way. There are some people today, we do it quarterly. We don't have time to do it every Sunday. Yeah, Why remember Jesus hanging on the cross? We don't need to do that, right? But it's just amazing that people think they can change what God said. Well, as long as we are doing it, we're just doing it the way we want to do it, but we're still doing it, so God will be okay with it. No, if Moses has said, well, I built the tabernacle, but I changed a few things, God will be okay with it. He wouldn't have. And Moses understood that. That's why it keeps saying Moses did all that God commanded him. He did it exactly the way God told him to do it. And you and I, the people today, we got to do that too. But it's, like I said, it's amazing how people they can't seem to understand that. They think they can play around with God's word. We just can't do it. All right, then in verses 10 through 22, we're introduced to the Ark of the Covenant, which would have looked something like this. I'm not sure if Indiana Jones actually found it, but pretty sure he didn't. So this was a chest, a container, designed to hold what? And I'm not asking for specifics, just generally speaking, what would it hold? Based on what we just said.
Quite a bit. That thing's well built.
Yeah. But what would it hold? Yeah, whatever God wanted it to. Would it hold what Moses wanted to put in there? Or what Aaron put in there? No, whatever God said, that's what they're going to put in there. So it'll hold whatever it is that God wants it to hold. So God tells Moses here that that's where he's going to put the 10 Commandments. Moses is going to, that's where the stone tablets will be kept, is in the Ark of the Covenant. I wonder, do we have any idea what else was in there? Well, actually we do. You look at Hebrews 9 and verse 4, we see what else was in the ark. It says, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein, so here it is, what's inside of it, wherein was the golden pot that had manna. So y'all remember that? When Moses told Aaron, because God told Moses told Aaron, save some of this manna, we're going to put it in a pot, we're going to keep it. Because after we get out of the wilderness, the manna will never be seen again. So the golden pot that had the manna is in the ark, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant. Those three things for sure were in that ark. If there was anything else, it's not recorded, so we don't know. But we know those three things, God declared that's what's going to be put in there. Okay? And if you're curious about, well, how big was the ark? Well, it talks about cubits, and a cubit's about 18 inches. So it was a little bit short of 4 feet long. And then it was about 2¼ feet wide and about 2¼ feet deep. Just if you're curious about how big was it, that's about the size of it. As you can see, it had a way to carry it. And God gave Moses detailed instructions on how to do that, how to build that, and how to carry it.
And who to carry it.
And who to carry it. And we'll see later on down the line, not as part of this class, but a man named Uzzah. Right? Was he trying to deliberately sin against God? No, he just thought it was going to fall. Right? So we're carrying something that looks like it's going to tip over. You and I instinctively probably would, but he wasn't supposed to touch it. Yeah, they were carrying it the wrong way. So again, not doing what God told. God was very specific about this. And so some people, wow, that's really cruel that why wouldn't he cut Uzzah some slack there? Well, the guy was just trying to steady the ark. Well, like you said, if they'd been doing it right in the first place, nobody would have needed to steady it. But in the second place, God told them explicitly, don't touch it. God says what he means, and he means what he says. If we follow that, do what? No, that was it.
I was going to say, they wouldn't have had to carry it on the cart in the first place if they hadn't blindly taken it into battle, thinking that the Ark of the Covenant was going to save them.
Right.
It would have been in the tent where it needed to be.
Right. Did God tell them to take it into battle? Nope. Like just do what I tell you to do, and you can't lose. And the message is the same today, right? We may suffer trials and tribulations in life, but in the end, we're going to win if we're faithful to God. So that message hasn't changed. So anyway, it includes the way to carry it. You see on top, that's called the mercy seat, the lid that goes on top of it. And it's made of wood and it's overlaid with gold. Again, we don't want to go through all the details. And the lid was solid gold. Now, I don't remember if I did not put that on there. So I did want you to know that you see this right here, these two, they are cherubims. So I'll spell that for you because I did want you to know that. Cherubims is CHERUBIMS, cherubims. Those are angels. We also have seraphims, but that's not what they are. They're cherubims. And so as you can see, they were facing each other with their wings outstretched. And again, because that's how God commanded. This is exactly how he wanted it done. And that was solid gold. So the chest itself was wood overlaid with gold. That was solid gold. And God said, this is where he would appear. This is where his focus would be, is right here. And again, not in a physical form, but you know. So I think we can say the lid is kind of symbolic of God's mercy, because God's mercy covers his law. And we'll see, and again, we're not going to go through very exact instructions are given about this, even about the dishes, the utensils to be used, and bread was to be kept on that table. Okay. Now, details about the service in the worship, that'll be given in Leviticus. But again, a lot of details about this. But we don't have to memorize or have to know all those details. Just know that God wanted it done a very certain way. Okay, then in verses 31 through 40, it talks about the candlestick. Very detailed, made of gold. There's a main candle, and then there's 6 others, 3 on each side. So you have a total of 7 candles. And 7 again represents what? Completeness. All right. But again, God gives him very exact instructions about how to make this and how to use it. And this candlestick was going to be the only source of light inside the tabernacle. So what does that symbolize, you think? It's the only source of light inside the place of worship. What's the source of light for us? God or Jesus, yeah, right. Okay. So God is the only light for the church, and this was the only source of light in the tabernacle. God's word is the light. It is the truth. So I just want to show you, it would look something like this, based on the instructions that God gave. And so you've got the outer courtyard here, and the brazen altar, and the laver. We haven't talked about those things yet, but here's the tabernacle itself. And I mean, God even told Moses exactly where to put the furniture. He didn't say, well, just decorate any way you want to. They were told specifically where everything was to be placed. Okay? So again, God wants it done exactly the way that he wants it done. Okay, let's see if we can get 26 here. I think we can do that. We're still way behind. Okay. So again, I put this up here because it just kind of sums it up, right? You must make the tabernacle and design all its furnishings according to the pattern I show you. I being God. Nobody gets a vote. Moses didn't get a vote. Aaron didn't get a vote. You and I don't get a vote. The way God said. So in chapter 26, we get a lot of the instructions regarding how to build the tabernacle. And there is a lot of detail, but we don't have the complete picture. Like, probably couldn't build it today and be sure that we were 100% accurate. Well, was that a problem? Probably couldn't. Do we need it? No. Right? So God doesn't care that we don't know how to build it. We weren't instructed to build it, right? Moses obviously understood everything that God told him to do. But God's not building the tabernacle for all generations. It's going to be a temporary thing, again, until they get to the temple, right? But Moses was able to understand exactly what God wanted, and we know that when it was built, God was very pleased with it. So obviously Moses did exactly what he was supposed to do. So
Holy Spirit. He was filled with the Holy Spirit to do so.
yeah, God, like there's going to be two guys we're going to talk about that God puts them in charge, and he said, I will give them the ability to do everything they need to do. Yeah. So verses 1 through 6, it talks about the curtains. Again, we're not going to go through all the details, but very intricate about how they're to be made, and of course they're going to be magnificent. So a lot of these things we can go through pretty quickly. Verses 7 through 14 talks about the outer covering. This is what would protect it from the elements. And they were a more durable material because it'd be the sun, the rain, all that kind of stuff. And then in verses 15 through 30, talks about how to build the framework of the tent itself. Okay, and so once again, we don't need to go through all that, but it's very intricate. This goes this way, and this goes this way, and you connect these things. And the instructions are very exact. And in verse 30, again, God tells Moses, I want you to do it exactly the way I told you to do it. Like I said, a lot of people today, they think, well, as long as I worship God any old way, it's good enough. As long as I'm worshiping. But the Bible just simply doesn't teach that. God wants it done a certain way. Okay? And we talked about earlier different kinds of worship, right? What's vain worship? God doesn't approve. You're wasting your time. Well, I'm worshiping. Not in God's eyes, you're not. You may think you are, but he doesn't, and that's all that counts, is what he thinks, right? So, yeah, we can't do things the way we want to do it. We've got to do it the way God said to do it. And so all these detailed instructions of the tabernacle is a good example of that. When people say, well, as long as you're doing it, God really doesn't care how you do it. That's not what the scriptures tell us. The scriptures show us a God who is very exact, very detailed. Well, he shouldn't be so picky. I've heard people say that. Well, he did create everything. I mean, I think he's got a right to, I want it done this way, right? We all have a house, a abode of some kind. Who gets to decorate your house? You do, right? Should I be allowed to come in your house and say, Lauren, that table doesn't belong there. It should go over here. I'm pretty sure she'd tell me where to get off if I did that, right? It's her house. She can put it any way she wants. It's God's universe. He can do it any way he wants. Our job is to, if you want it that way, Lord, and that pleases you, then that's the way I want to do it. Right? If I really love God, then I want to make him happy, and I want to do the way he said it, not the way I think it should be done, because I need to understand I'm not as smart as he is. Right? My method cannot possibly be better than his. I need to understand that, and whatever you say, Lord, that's the best way to do it. So we're going to do it that way. And that's what Moses did. And at the end of the chapter, it talks about the veil. So this would divide the tabernacle into two sections or two rooms. And as you can imagine, the veil was very beautiful, it's very expensive. Again, there's a lot of details in there about how to do it. But I do want you to know what the two rooms were called. And you probably know.
Holy place, most holy place.
Yeah, so you've got the holy place and the most holy place. And the veil divided those two from each other. And so God commanded that the ark would be behind the veil in the most holy place. Yeah, I think it's basically the same thing, yeah. And like I said, God tells Moses exactly where to put all the furniture. Here's where the ark goes. Here's where the table of showbread. Here's where the candlestick goes. I mean, it was exact. So the showbread table, the candlestick, they will be in the holy place. And then so will something we haven't talked about yet, the altar of incense. God said that was to be placed right in front of the veil, but it will be in the holy place. But right before you would go through the veil to get in the most holy place. All right, guys. Can you stay with me another 5 minutes? If we can do 27 is real short. We can do it, and at least we're still behind, but getting closer. All right, in chapter 27, first 8 verses talk about something known as the brazen altar. B-R-A-Z-E-N, the brazen altar. Again, you got very detailed instructions about this. But this was to be used for the animal sacrifices.
Located in the courtyard.
Yes. Yeah, it's outside the tabernacle. And some people, they'll say, man, that's pretty cruel and repulsive that they got to kill all these animals and sacrifice all these animals. And especially if you're an animal lover, be kind of highly sensitive to that. But, you know, the Roman cross, that was pretty cruel and repulsive too. And the man who was up there didn't belong up there. I belong up there. But he did it for me. So, again, the idea that, yes, it's cleansing of sin is a painful, just like sin itself, it's a painful thing. So anyway, that's the brazen altar. That's not the same thing as the altar of incense. You're going to have that too. But the brazen altar would be out in the courtyard. That's where they would sacrifice the animals. Okay, and so then verses 9 through 19 talks about the outer court. And we saw in the picture a while ago, somebody reconstructed it. This would surround the tabernacle, keeping it separate from everything else because it's holy, you know. So we're told again in cubits, but if you converted it to feet, it'd be 150 feet long and 75 feet wide. And then there was on the east side, there was a gate. How people would come in. The gate was 30 feet wide. And that's where people would bring the animals in to the brazen altar to sacrifice.
All of those dimensions.
150 feet long and 75 feet wide. And then the last couple verses of the chapter, it talks about the Israelites were to bring pure olive oil for the candlestick because they're supposed to keep it burning. And so, but God said the olive oil has to be pure, can't have any impurities in it. Candlestick's got to keep burning. Now, I'll give you a guess. Who do you think was supposed to make sure that happened? Who's supposed to tend the candlestick? The priest, yeah, and the first one would be Aaron. So Aaron and his sons, that would be their job, one of their jobs, to make sure that the candlestick is continually burning, it's taken care of. But everybody had to give some of this pure olive oil to do that. Okay. That gets us up to chapter 28. So we will stop there. Chapter 28 talks about the garments of the priest. All right. You